by dwelling on study samples which are representative of the total population. But there's one caveat there. In other words, you could take more than 400 people based on the fact that the larger the sample, the more representative it is. This is the law of large numbers, that instead of taking 10%, maybe you want to take 15% to make your sample even larger and therefore even more representative. So that's the first thing you do before you go to the field. There are various ways of doing sampling. You can do purposive sampling, where you target the people who can give you the appropriate information. You can do quota sampling, which is based on just the number of people you want to select. You can do random sampling, which is a little bit much more scientific and gives an equal chance of being selected to every respondent. Now, you need to read the details of all of these in the detailed slides where all of these have been discussed to some greater extent. So you've got your sample now, and then you want to figure out exactly how do you obtain information from your respondents. You're going to talk to them through interviews, and you're going to give them questionnaires to feel, particularly if they're educated well enough to be able to write and read, to be able to give you answers to your questions written on paper. Or are you going to observe them? Or maybe do you want to do what is known as participant observation? You pretend to be an armed robber and mix up with them and be able to get first-hand information. By pretending to be an armed robber, they will tell you much more of what you can learn through interviewing, because you have the opportunity to exactly observe what they do and why they do it and how they do it. So all of those techniques are available to you, and you can select only one of them, or you can combine interviews and observation, or you can combine questionnaires and interviewing as well. So okay, you have your sample, you have the tool to get information from the sample. The final thing you need to do is to adopt a certain temperament. In other words, this is known as the scientific temperament, which means that you have to have a certain approach to your respondents. And it has 4 key variables. You have to be skeptical, in the sense that you do not believe everything you're told on a face value. For example, you ask a respondent, how much do you earn? And he says, okay, I earn 400 Ghana cedis a month. Do not believe that. You have to probe, probe, probe. You have to have a doubting mind, a doubting approach. Don't believe people exactly on what they tell you at first hand. Probe, probe, probe to be able to discover the truth. You may begin by asking the person, how much do you pay for your rent? Do you have a number of kids you send to school? He has 3. How much do you pay for Kojo? How much do you pay for Akosua? How much do you pay for Kwesi? And you're putting all of these figures down. How much do you pay for food? How much do you pay for the utilities, electricity, and other consumables at home? Healthcare delivery, your clothing, how much do you pay for all of those in a month? And when you total the responses that it gives you, you discover that the person actually given you no problem.
Is he on silent?
I don't know why the hell I brought this along. We can still edit this.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about this.
Just put it on silent.
Yeah. Okay.
Since it needs to be European first.
What the hell is going on?
Somewhere to the other side.
Where do we begin from? Oh, I should take the, no. Come into the field. Number 3, all over again, or? I was on the last, as the scientific temperament. So maybe let me take the observational data collection all over again. Okay. Now, when you're done with the definition of the key concepts, the next stage is the observation and collection of data. You're absolutely ready to come to the field now. And there are a couple of things that you need to do to be able to actually go on your field work. These are, number 1, you need to identify the people you want to talk to. Let's assume that there are about 8 to 10,000 armed robbers in Ghana. You won't be able to talk to all of them, although that is the ideal situation. If you're able to talk to all of them, you have done 100% coverage. But that is time-consuming, and it may be quite costly to be able to travel to all the prisons in Ghana to get information from all of them. So what you do is what is known as sampling. A sample is a fraction of the population that you want to study. So let's say that there are 8,000 armed robbers in the country, and you want to do what is known as representative sampling. That is, you take about 10% of the 8,000, and that will give you about 400. But you could as well, if you want to be quite representative, you can increase that 400 to maybe 500 or 450. This is known as the law of large numbers, meaning that the larger the sample, the more representative it is. In fact, we are expected to have covered 100%. Now you're doing just about 10%. So if you make it even 15%, you're approaching a greater level of representativeness of your sample. Now, when you're done with the sampling, and there are various ways of doing sampling, you can do what is known as purposive sampling, which means that you go directly to people who you know can give you the kind of information you're looking for, and you select them. Or you can do quota sampling, which means that you're only going to determine a certain number of respondents, and it doesn't matter where you get them. You can get them in the street, you can get them in church, as long as you reach the number of 400. That is all you're interested in. Or you can do random sampling, which is a little bit much more complicated and is scientific, but we try to discuss that in the details. Now, random sampling gives an equal chance to everyone in the population to be selected, and that is much more scientific. When you've done your sampling, the next stage is, or the next requirement before you go to the field, is to adopt a certain temperament. That is known as the scientific temperament. This is going to enable you to relate to your respondent in a certain way, which will enable them to give you the facts that you're looking for. Now, firstly, you have to be skeptical. In other words, you should have a doubting mind. You do not have to believe anything that you're told as being true. You have to develop the technique of probing to get to the facts. For example, you ask someone, how much do you earn a month? And he tells you, well, I earn about 400 Ghana cedis. do not believe that kind of response. Normally and usually, people do not want to disclose the truth about their income, so you don't want to believe. So you want to probe to be able to establish if that information is accurate by asking a person a number of questions, particularly structured around all needs. How much do you spend on food? How much rent do you pay? Do you have a number of kids going to school? If there are 3 of them, how much do you pay for Kosua? How much do you pay for Kujo? How much do you pay for Kweku? And you're putting all of those figures down. What about for utilities, your electricity consumption and your water bill? All of these, you put them down. And what about food and health care? When you total them up, you will discover that the person has actually not told you the truth, because you are likely to get a figure which is more than 400. So that is skepticism. That is a temperament you have to adopt. You don't trust that whatever response you get is 100% accurate. So probe, probe, probe. Next is to be humble, or humility. In other words, you go to the field. If you're going to be talking to farmers, you want to look like a farmer. You don't want to go to talk to farmers dressed up in a suit. They would look upon you as a Mr. Know-It-All. You're dressed in a suit and you're carrying a briefcase. You look like someone who is coming to lord your position over them. And they kind of psych themselves up not to be truthful to you. So go to the farmers dressed up in jeans and T-shirts. Probably just try very hard to look like them. So when they see you, they can identify with you, you establish a rapport with them, and they're in a position to tell you the truth. This is basically lowering yourself to their level to get a true information from them, because they look upon you as one of them. And next requirement is that you have to be objective. Objectivity requires that you should be in a position to accept evidence dispassionately. You should not put your personal biases on the information you have. You should not judge the people. And the next one is ethical neutrality, which is very close to objectivity, except that ethical neutrality requires that you should suppress your ethical convictions or your doctrinal teachings or your religious beliefs. If you happen to be a Christian, for example, who is investigating Muslims, you do not want to use your Christian beliefs and practices to judge them. Don't say because they are marrying or they are married to 4 wives, they have departed from the truth. 4 wives is their truth. Your truth is 1 wife. So don't use your ethical convictions to judge other people. So basically, this is the kind of temperament you should have before you go into the field. Having done all of these preparations, you go to the field and collect your data. When you're done with talking to or collecting questionnaires from the 400 respondents, you come down to empirical generalization, which requires that you look at the figures. You don't come to empirical generalization. You measurement and analysis is what should come before empirical generalization. It means that you're going to enter your data into the computer, and then the computer is going to provide you figures, which you're going to look at to be able to come to a general conclusion as to which of the factors that you tested for, unemployment, inadequate income, peer pressure, or little or no education, which of them turn out to be more significant. That is what you're going to be getting from the processing of your data, and which is going to serve as a basis for your empirical generalization. You're going to look at the figures and say that based on the figures in front of me, I conclude that unemployment is the greater reason identified by the armed robbers as being the predisposition to armed robbery, because they're not employed, they don't have any income. So that becomes your empirical generalization, the picture that you're painting out of your research, that as far as armed robbery in Ghana is concerned, it is unemployment which is the major factor. And you may look at the next figure, which is in terms of the order of magnitude. It may be peer pressure, which is probably maybe out of the 400, let's say that 279 identified unemployment. So that may be the majority. And then the next figure could be 101 for peer pressure, and then you have about 68 for inadequate income, etc. So based on those figures, you have a general picture structured around unemployment as being the most significant factor influencing armed robbery in the country. The next stage is to do a logical induction, which is where you try to consider whether the theory you began with has found support. You began with the theory of anomy. To what extent does unemployment, which is the major finding in your research, to what extent is this explainable with reference to the anomy theory? And basically, what do you think yourself? Does unemployment have any relevance to anomy? Yes, it does, in the sense that if an individual is unemployed, he has no access to legitimate incomes to be able to achieve his cultural goals legitimately. That is what Merton says, that the cultural goals are there and the means to achieve them legitimately is equally there. But here you are, the armed robbers are telling you that they are unemployed. So the conclusion is that because they are unemployed, they have no access to legitimate income to achieve the cultural goals. Therefore, they have innovated armed robbery as a way of getting money to be able to survive. So you find that your finding is explainable by the theory of anomy, which means that you confirm that theory, or let's say if it wasn't unemployment which you found to be the major factor, and it was rather peer pressure. To what extent is peer pressure explainable by the anomy theory? It may not be quite easy to explain peer pressure from anomy, which means that if that was the predominant factor you discovered by your research, it means that a theory of anomy that you started with as your perspective would have to be modified, or we have to be replaced by quite a different theory, in which case you may have to suggest that among the armed robbers that you investigated, peer pressure is the most significant factor, and this cannot be explained with reference to anomy, but rather with reference to the differential association theory, which explains that people become criminals as a result of learning ways of committing crime from their peers or persons in intimate personal groups. So this is how you do logical deduction to establish if your theoretical perspective has found support or needed to be modified or needed to be replaced completely. So you come finally back to theory. So this is exactly the systematic ways of acquiring knowledge in sociology, in the natural sciences, which determine the scientificity of research. And this is what you adopt in the urban communities to be able to generate information which is valid and which you can rely on as a policy perspective to be able to suggest what can be done about the problem, because it is based on empirical evidence. Well, thank you very much for listening and reading these summaries. I hope that you do find them very useful. As you read the detailed discussions, these are the key issues that you need to pay attention to. But as much as possible, you should attempt to apply the detailed discussions to your life as an urban resident. All of these things that we're talking about, they are just a systematic collection of information from the urban communities that you live in, which has then become urban sociology. So they are quite applicable to your daily lives. Try and figure out how these things are actually evident in your communities. I wish you all the best in your studies and in your examinations.